So who are you voting for? And I knew this guy. I'd been in his truck or his car.
This is Democratic Visions Extra with Loren Niemi and Mike Gelfand.
Why?
So what are we going to do to keep our sanity?
Well,
I mean, we can say our things, give our speeches, tell our stories, have our podcasts.
well, wait, don't underestimate the power of telling our stories, because that really does make a difference. In the days when I was a lobbyist,
You were a lobbyist?
Yeah, I was a lobbyist for 10 years. Yeah.
For the good guys or the bad guys?
For the good guys.
Okay.
For the good guys. But whenever we had to go before a committee, whenever people had to testify, I always would say to them, find the human story connected to this issue.
Sure.
These guys who are voting, for them, money and numbers are all abstract. What they want to know is what is the effect it has on individuals. What will it do for one of their constituents, right? So
That's what we try to do. We did try to do, at least in journalism. Yeah. You want to personalize the story.
Right.
You don't want it to be abstract.
Right. The idea that that currently they're getting rid of 3,000 IRS employees. That's very abstract. But if you know someone who worked for the IRS and is suddenly without a job, it's much more personal and it's much more real in terms of what now? What do we do? How do we help you, or how do we help you find another job? And then on another level, it's a matter of am I ever going to see a tax return?
Yeah. Well, do we ever have to file things anymore? We not have to.
Well, we're all very rich, so we don't have to worry, right?
I know when I got audited, my accountant said, "Okay, we're in the clear." They were auditing me because I had won all this money at the track, and then I had taken deductions, so they don't like that. They don't like that at all, and so my accountant, he made an appointment for 2 in the afternoon. He said, "It's 2 we're going to be there at 2 in the afternoon, 2, and it'll be fine because he's going home at 4:30." So and it was true. And I started things off humor only goes so far, okay?
Sure.
So I walk in there and he's got this. The guy's name is Nelson or Larson or something. He's got this huge poster. Oh, it was Norway. It was someone skiing, and all it said was Norway. And so I walked in, I looked at it, and I said, the motherland. He just didn't see the humor. But that's the whole point, You're in pain, and you react with humor. I was in pain, I reacted with humor.
Right, yeah. Okay. So the other thing, Jeff, in terms of what do we do is the local counts. The city council election, the county election, the state elections. Ultimately, the bulwark for democracy still is at a local level. If we can maintain it here, it's harder to impose from outside. So
and get to one of those school board meetings. A lot of harm comes out of those meetings.
School board, library board,
Yeah. People demand that books be burned, and it goes on, and people be fired, and you can't teach this and you can't teach that.
Oh, yeah. Where's that stuff going?
Well,
book banning and things like that.
where that's going is that you have to. Again, if I'm at a school board meeting and 4 people are saying, these books need to be banned, and I can get 4 people to stand up and say, no, they don't. As a matter of fact, we should make more books available. It gives the school board, it makes the crux of the decision much harder, and it makes their ability to make a good decision much easier. If they only hear from one side, and the complainers are always willing to come and complain.
Yeah, and none of them read books anyway.
Right.
Nobody reads books. I'm sorry to say that. I'm writing one myself, but let's face it. I had an Uber driver. I love to tell Uber driver stories because I talk to them.
Sure.
And this guy, he was about 35, and he asked me, what I've done for a living, and I said, well, I used to work for newspapers. And he said, oh man, he said, newspapers, like he'd never heard the word before. I said, yeah. I said, do you read much? He said, well, I get all my news from Instagram, and it's great because I can find out everything that's going on in the world in 5 minutes. And I said, well, you know, they may not be totally thorough there in telling you what's going on. And he said, yeah, I know. I said, well, do you read? I said, do you read books? And he said, books? He said, yeah, you know, books, you know, with like the hard covers and things, and you turn the page. And he said, you know, I've been thinking of reading a book. It's on my to-do list. And he said, but well, would you recommend any books? I said, well, I think our tastes probably are not quite the same. But I said, you know, probably one of the greatest books ever written is a book called The Grapes of Wrath. And he said, the grapes of what? And I said, well, we'll talk about it some other time.
Yeah.
He wasn't ready.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Well, you could have started him off with, you know, some of Dr. Seuss's books, which are the anti-fascist books that he did during the war.
Yeah.
You know. But, you know, it's interesting. For me, when you talk about books, one of the things I often say is, you know, have you read Moby Dick? You know, because that's a good test. You know, most people they've read the first 6 sentences.
Yeah. Well,
you know,
yes.
You know,
For
but
us older people.
Moby Dick is. I mean, I've read Moby Dick 7, 8 times now. I've built an entire performance around it because it is one of those beautiful books that's layers. They're satiric humor, horror, naturalism. You know.
Yeah.
You know, it's all there if you're willing to wade through it. You know, and.
Just Google Bob Sanson.
Well, that's it for now. Thanks for being with us.
Democratic Visions is handcrafted by volunteers from Eden Prairie, Hopkins, Minnetonka, Edina, and Bloomington. Watch us on select cable systems and on our YouTube channel. This is Carol Sundstrom.